Well, all right, let's bring Scott Grayson in. He was there last night in Atlanta for Grayson's grades. We'll start with Wentz. You gave him a B, Scott, and, a lot of people are, attacking Wentz today, critical of him, or saying, hey, he was gutsy last night. You gave him a B. You were there. What'd you see from him before and then after the game in the locker room?
Well, yeah, I think I put this in there. It was a very tough one to grade because obviously it was so bad at the beginning. And what you guys were talking about in those first 15 scripted plays, certainly Carson has not been on in any stretch of the imagination. So, he was bad. But then when he really needed to be good at the end, with nobody out there that the Falcons had to really respect as a receiving threat, he somehow was able to get these guys down the field. He did make some miraculous plays, which you guys are accurate. I'm sitting there, too, watching him thinking, you got to get rid of the ball. You can see the pocket closing down, and he wants to do the Houdini act again, which, hey, it worked last night a little bit, but you go to that well too often, you're going to get injured. And so, yeah, and then in terms of the locker room afterwards, look, there were some guys, and I believe Carson was one of these. I heard the noise turn around, and I wasn't sure, but they were banging suitcases and stuff against the sides of their lockers. They were ticked off that they lost that game. The emotion was really showing. And when I looked at Carson when I first got in there, his left side looked a little swollen to me, right below, the bottom of the rib cage. So I'm really curious to see what the word is going to be on him. He was looking to get into an ice bath before they left the stadium last night. I heard him talking to one of the trainers. So he's certainly trying to get that taken care of, and I guess we'll find out if there's any severity to that injury at all. But you heard Doug today. It didn't sound like, he's thinking Carson's going to miss any time.
Do you think, Scott, before we get into the grades, on the Carson thing, do you think it's a learn the hard way approach that he has where he does come out trying to gunsling a little too much in the first quarter and then he takes a bunch of hits or they fall behind and then it clicks with him in the second or third quarter that I got to start running the offense the correct way, taking what the defense gives, and then that gets him into the rhythm that you always see here in the second half?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I think he does try. Look, these guys hear it all the time. They know that they were so bad in the first quarter last year that they're trying to get off to a good start. And I'm sure he's pressing a little bit on that. And I think we're seeing some of that. I think he's got to do a better job of taking whatever the defense will give him. And if it's 3 yards, 4 yards here or there, that's winning the down, in my opinion. 3-4 yards every time is enough to move the chains over 3 down. So he's got to – I agree with you guys. I think he's trying to take too much on certain plays as opposed to what they're giving him. And if he can play more in the first quarter like he does eventually in the second and third quarters, I think that would certainly bode well for this offense.
All right, Scott, like you said, no A's given out last night. A B, and you just mentioned him, Nelson Aguilar. He's getting a lot of focus and attention and criticism, some good, a lot bad. What are your thoughts on Nelson? Are we giving him too much criticism? Are we not giving him enough credit? 8 passes, 107 yards, and a touchdown when, up until game time, he didn't know that he wasn't going to have Alshon Jeffrey, D-Jax, and Goddard lining up alongside him.
Yeah, let me start with this with Nelson because I think what I saw last night was a lot of growth in this guy in terms of maturity. Look, he had the game in his hands literally, and it went right through him. And he did come back. And in the past, Jeff can certainly vouch for this as well. He would have shut down. He would have dropped another ball. He would have dropped the one that he ended up catching that on fourth down. But what I've seen out of Aguilar is the ability to compartmentalize those things, pack them away, and try to forget about them to go on to the next play. He did make that big catch after it. What I think, saw in terms of growth out of Aguilar was when the media came into the locker room, he looked around the locker room at the other players who were getting changed and trying to hit the showers, and he just stepped away from his locker and was like, let's do this. And he was the first one to talk. And he knew what the questions were going to be. And he's got very defensive in the past. I know I've irritated him at times with some of my questions about dropped passes, but he took them last night, and he took them all. He owned them. He accepted the fact that he, should have made that play. I felt like there was maybe a little bit in him trying to say that the lights might have gotten in the way of the ball, but he didn't sit there for long and stay on that. He said, I've got to make that catch, and he said it multiple times. So there's some acceptability, some ownership there. That's part of the character in this locker room that I think sometimes gets overlooked. They all do it. Zach Ertz did it as well when he talked to the media, owned up that he should have had the marker, and he wasn't there. And so I think with Aguilar, with Aguilar, you see some growth, but you got to, in this league, you got to make those catches.
Scott Grayson was live in Atlanta last night. Grayson's grades. I see that Jim Schwartz did not make the grades. Now, I know late flights and early flights and getting in and getting out, but overall, what did you think of the defense? I saw a couple of guys, McLeod, you gave a B. I think Sidney Jones made your list as a C, but Darby was a D. A lot of people, ask every week, why doesn't he blitz? Why doesn't he blitz? Well, he seemed to do it a little bit more. 24 points. What did you think of Jim Schwartz's unit last night?
Schwartz is probably the most criticized defensive coordinator we've had around here in some time because he never seems to do exactly what everybody wants. He's not blitzing enough. Well, now he blitzed too much. He's not helping his corners. When are we going to get some help for these corners? And, last night, that's what I was thinking was you got to give him safety help. How many times do you need to see these guys get beat and the ball go off fingertips that would be touchdowns before you start thinking, okay, this is not working? And, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think they're seeing how much they're missing Jalen Mills right now. They're just not locking things down out there, and they usually don't. I've always felt like under Schwartz these corners play soft, and then they get taken advantage of. And quite frankly, and this tells you how Fletcher Cox's toe is still bothering him, and they're just not getting pressure on the quarterback through 2 weeks. And Matt Ryan, is a guy, you don't even have to get to him. You just got to make him move off that spot in the pocket. And they couldn't really do that last night. And Ryan was throwing up these balls downfield. He knew if I give my guy a 50-50 ball, man, 50% of the time he's going to come down with it, and we're going to score. And ultimately, that did happen. And look, Matt Ryan made mistakes. The Eagles' defense made some plays when they had to, but they had one play to make on fourth down. And I know that's why I believe it was Malcolm Jenkins banging his suitcase against the locker last night because he was frustrated that the defense had the game and didn't hold up on it. So in terms of Schwartz, I thought he dialed up some decent blitzes at decent times. I just would have liked to seen him provide a little more safety help with his corners who were struggling.
Now, real quick, I saw you gave the injury tent an F. Now, I thought that you seriously, I was.
There was
following
a bouncer
you
there outside the medical tent.
Right. I was following you on Twitter last night because I thought you were doing a really good job of kind of like step by step. What was going on, because they surely weren't giving you a lot of indication on television. But, what was it like watching the scene from the press box down on that sideline? It had to be chaotic.
Right where I was sitting, I had line of sight right down the Eagles sideline at that blue. And it's blue, so it stands out. Every time it comes up, you see it, and you're like, oh, God, now who's in there? And, and you'd see the red hat come out, which tells you that it's a head injury. So then at least you knew what the injury was. You're waiting to see what player emerges. It was crazy. At one point I tweeted they should have just right in the middle of the game had a ritual and burned the thing in hopes that it might, get them some better mojo. But, it was – I've never seen anything like that. It was up, I think, more than it was down, and it was just a rotating door of who was going in there. Now, I think it is very interesting the way that the league identified, in particular Carson Wentz's case, that he needed to go in and get evaluated. I know he was ticked off about the time delay and then missing the plays that led to McCown going in like you guys were talking about. But it was wild. And I think, the players were not, to their credit again, and this speaks to the character in the locker room, they were not using the injuries as an excuse. But you can't help but look around the huddle and constantly see somebody different popping their head in. It's like, yo, Bob, what are you doing in here? Well, Jim had to go out to the injury tent, so I'm in now. It's like it was wild, but it does beg a larger question here: did the lack of preseason reps affect any of that? Are they not taking the steps that they need to prepare their bodies to play? Does the Eagles medical staff have issues on how they're treating these players during the week? Like, how do you go into a game and Dallas Goedert gets hurt before the game even starts, or hurt bad enough that he's now? And why wasn't he inactive then? Although they probably didn't bring somebody to fill the spot. There's all kinds of things here that I think are a larger issue that need to be addressed.
Yeah, and you brought up one of them with Doug Peterson as we talk with Scott Grayson here. Remember, you can read Grayson's grades on 97.3 ESPN.com. Similarly, Scott, the way Doug kind of took ownership today about I've got to get my plays right for the first 15 plays. I got to get this team off to a better start. You gave him a C and kind of pointed to this continuing trend of getting off to a bad start. And I do wonder if a lot of it is due to you don't play these guys in the preseason. You've decided that you're going to take that risk reward of keeping them healthy and coming out a little sloppy. But as the coach, it's got to then be your number one mission and your directive to make sure that if you do that these guys are ready to go on game day in the first quarter, and he still hasn't figured that part out.
No, you're right, and it's it's hard not to look at what's different, because in 2017 that was one of their keys. They got off to quick starts, they built a lead, easier for the defense then to make a team one-dimensional, and it was a cookie cutter formula they followed almost every week to beat everybody. And they can't get out of the gate at all right now. So their cookie-cutter formula right now is, well, we'll just come back in the second half. Well, you can't do that in this league and expect to win all the time. And I think right now, that's a big thing they've got to fix. You're right. How much do the lack of reps in the preseason against the live bullets hurt this team? And I think that they've got to find a way to do it. And when you look at this week coming up, I don't know if they're going to be able to do it against Detroit, because how many of these guys who are nursing injuries are going to be at full practice participation? So now you're not repping the plays that you want to run in your top 15 here, and all of a sudden you're going into the game going, well, fingers crossed, let's hope it works. Really tough to work that way. They've got to fix that, or this is going to be a long year.
Scott Grayson, check out Grayson's grades at 973ESPN.com and his videos from inside the Eagles locker room. You can also check Scott out on Fox 29 as the Eagles lose in Atlanta, and he was there last night to kind of, check it all out. And, man, what a wild scene from Atlanta. Well done, Scott. We will check out Grayson's grades again after Eagles and Lions next week. Thanks, pal.
All right. Thanks, guys.